15,000 feet above the German town of Schweinfurt, October 14, 1943, a Luftwaffe pilot settled into his cockpit seat, adjusting his oxygen mask as his F-190 climbed through scattered clouds. Below him, American B-17 flying fortresses lumbered eastward in their characteristic box formations. He would add another kill to his tally today, his 18th heavy bomber. The physics of aerial warfare seemed immutable. German interceptors possessed every advantage. They chose when to attack, where to strike, and could disengage at will. The American bombers, flying deep into the Reich without protective fighters, were targets waiting for execution. That morning, 291 flying fortresses had violated German airspace, bound for the ball-bearing plants at Schweinfurt. Before nightfall, 60 would be missing, another 17 damaged beyond repair. The Germans had a phrase for it: Hasen Party, a rabbit hunt. Americans would remember it as Black Thursday, the costliest day in 8th Air Force history. Neither side understood that German supremacy stood on the edge of extinction. Within 16 weeks, the balance would shift so completely that the hunters would become the hunted. Late 1943 represented the zenith of Luftwaffe fighter doctrine. Pilots like Major Wilhelm Ferdinand Galland, Hauptmann Georg Peter Eder, and Major Walter Dahl had transformed bomber interception into lethal choreography. Every American formation weakness had been cataloged, analyzed, and exploited through brutal trial and error. The combat box formation, 18 to 21 bombers arranged in three-dimensional space, theoretically created overlapping fields of fire from 13 50-caliber machine guns per aircraft. Reality proved less reassuring. German pilots had mapped every blind spot, the vulnerable nose, restricted ammunition loads, and crucially, the breaking point where fear overwhelmed discipline. Hauptmann Heinz Knoke, leading 5/JG-11, had perfected the frontal assault that targeted the B-17's weakest defensive angle. His first heavy bomber, a B-24 called Maisie, fell on February 26, 1943. By autumn, 16 more had followed. The technique demanded precision. Attack from 12 o'clock high, dive through the formation at 400 miles per hour, fire a 2-second burst into cockpit and engines, break away before top turret gunners could track your aircraft. Numbers validated German optimism. The first Schweinfurt-Regensburg raid on August 17, 1943, cost the Americans 60 bombers, 16% of the attacking force. Losses so severe that deep penetration missions ceased for weeks. When raids resumed with the second Schweinfurt attack, 77 bombers were lost or destroyed upon landing. Over 600 airmen died or entered captivity in a single day. Major Gunther Radusch, commanding 2/JG-11, developed the Sturmgruppe tactic. 8 FW-190s approaching line abreast, creating multiple simultaneous targets that saturated defensive fire. American gunners, confronted with 8 fighters closing at a combined 600 miles per hour, had seconds to choose targets. Most fired at nothing, paralyzed by fear. American vulnerability stemmed from elementary physics. No Allied fighter possessed sufficient range to accompany bombers into Germany's industrial heartland. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, primary American escort, managed only 375 miles of combat radius with drop tanks, enough to cross the German border, no further. The twin-engine Lockheed P-38 Lightning flew farther, but suffered catastrophic failures in European cold, engines seizing, controls freezing solid at high altitude. This limitation created a death zone. American bombers flew the most perilous portions of their missions, over the industrial Ruhr, over Berlin, over Bavaria, utterly alone. American vulnerability stemmed from elementary physics. No Allied fighter possessed sufficient range to accompany bombers into Germany's industrial heartland. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, primary American escort, managed only 375 miles of combat radius with drop tanks, enough to cross the German border, no further. The twin-engine Lockheed P-38 Lightning flew farther, but suffered catastrophic failures in European cold, engines seizing, controls freezing solid at high altitude. This limitation created a death zone. American bombers flew the most perilous portions of their missions, over the industrial Ruhr, over Berlin, over Bavaria, utterly alone. German fighters simply waited beyond Allied escort range, then struck with overwhelming force. Luftwaffe pilots called this the golden moment, the golden moment. Oberleutnant Hans Philipp, who claimed 206 victories before death in October 1943, explained the tactic clearly. "We tracked bomber streams by radar, calculating exactly when their escorts would turn back. The instant the little friends departed, we attacked. The bombers knew what awaited them. You could watch them tighten formations, see them preparing for the inevitable." The escort limitation created deadly arithmetic. A B-17 formation faced 4 hours over enemy territory, but only 90 minutes with fighter protection. German pilots could attack, land, refuel, rearm, and attack the same raid again while bombers struggled homeward. Some Luftwaffe pilots flew 3 or 4 sorties against a single American raid, multiplying their effectiveness exponentially. The P-51 Mustang's origin lay not in American initiative, but British desperation. April 1940, the British Purchasing Commission approached North American aviation seeking additional P-40 fighters. North American countered with a radical proposal: design and build an entirely new fighter in 120 days. The NA-73X first flew October 26, 1940, a remarkable feat of rapid engineering. Early Mustangs, powered by Allison V1710 engines, excelled at low altitude, but faltered above 15,000 feet, precisely where bomber escort was needed. The RAF deployed these early variants for reconnaissance and ground attack, where their exceptional range and low-altitude performance proved valuable. The critical transformation emerged from an unlikely marriage of American airframe design and British engine technology. April 1942, Rolls-Royce test pilot Ronald Harker flew an Allison-powered Mustang. He immediately recognized the potential. The airframe demonstrated aerodynamic efficiency exceeding even the legendary Spitfire. What it needed was different propulsion. Harker proposed installing the Rolls-Royce Merlin 61, the same 2-stage supercharged engine powering the latest Spitfires. The first Merlin-powered Mustang flew in October 1942. Results exceeded all projections. Maximum speed increased from 390 to 440 miles per hour. Performance above 20,000 feet transformed from marginal to exceptional. Service ceiling jumped from 31,000 to 42,000 feet. The marriage of American mass production capability with British engine sophistication created something neither nation could have achieved independently. What made the P-51B truly revolutionary wasn't performance alone, it was endurance. 3 factors converged: exceptional aerodynamic efficiency from its laminar flow wing, internal fuel capacity of 184 gallons in a lighter, more efficient airframe than competitors, and ability to carry external drop tanks without severe performance penalties. The laminar flow wing, designed by North Americans Edgar Schmood, maintained smooth airflow much farther along its surface than conventional designs. This reduced drag by nearly 30%, translating directly into fuel efficiency. While a P-47 consumed 100 gallons per hour in cruise flight, a P-51 burned only 65 gallons at identical speed. When 75-gallon drop tanks were added in early 1944, combat radius extended to 650 miles. With 108-gallon tanks introduced in March, radius stretched to 850 miles, sufficient to reach Berlin, engage in 20 minutes of combat, and return to England. No other single-engine fighter worldwide could match this combination of range and performance. The 354th Fighter Group, the Pioneer Mustang Group, received the first P-51Bs in November 1943. Based at Boxted in Essex, they were technically part of 9th Air Force, but immediately assigned to support 8th Air Force strategic bombing. Commander Colonel Kenneth Martin had mere days to convert his pilots from P-47s to the new fighter. Lieutenant Colonel Glenn Duncan, later commanding the 3rd 53rd Fighter Group, flew one of the first orientation flights. His recollection: "The instant I lifted off, I knew we had something extraordinary. The Mustang handled like a sports car compared to the truck-like Thunderbolt. Responsive, fast, and most importantly, it could fly forever." December 1, 1943, the first P-51B combat mission, a fighter sweep over Belgium and France. December 5th brought the first Escort mission to Amiens, a relatively short-range raid. 16 P-51Bs accompanied the bombers as a combat test more than a full escort. They encountered no enemy fighters, but the mission validated the aircraft's basic suitability. December 13th delivered the first long-range escort to Kiel, 490 miles from base, previously impossible for Allied fighters. The psychological impact reverberated through both air forces. German pilots intercepting what they expected to be unescorted bombers over northern Germany were shocked to encounter aggressive American fighters deep within Reich territory. The war's final week of 1943 saw intensified operations testing the Mustang's capabilities. December 20th, P-51Bs escorted bombers to Bremen, claiming 3 German fighters without loss. The Luftwaffe, still adapting to this new threat, continued standard tactics of waiting for escorts to depart. But the escorts weren't departing. German pilots initially mistook P-51Bs for P-47s at distance, expecting them to turn back momentarily. When Mustangs continued eastward past the P-47's maximum range, confusion transformed into alarm. Radio intercepts revealed German controllers repeatedly asking pilots to confirm fighter types and positions, unable to credit that Allied escorts had penetrated so deeply into Germany. Major Klaus Mitusch, commanding 3/JG-26, recognized the strategic implications immediately after a December 30th interception where Mustangs pursued his fighters to their landing approach. He reportedly told his pilots, "The air war has fundamentally transformed. Our sanctuary no longer exists." March 4, 1944, 25,000 feet above Brandenburg. Through scattered clouds below, the sprawling outline of Berlin lay clearly visible, the capital of the Reich, the city Hermann Göring swore would never see enemy aircraft. Above it, in perfect formation, flew 660 American heavy bombers. Surrounding them, weaving protective patterns, were scores of single-engine fighters bearing American markings. The first American fighter escort to Berlin represented more than tactical achievement. It demolished the myth of German invincibility. Colonel Donald Blakesley, commanding the 4th Fighter Group, led his 3 squadrons of P-51Bs on the historic 1,100-mile round trip. The 4th had received their Mustangs on February 28, 1944. 4 days later, they accomplished what German leadership deemed physically impossible. For Luftwaffe pilots rising to intercept, the sight defied comprehension. They had been assured Allied fighters could never reach Berlin, too distant, impossible for single-engine aircraft. Yet there they were, fresh and aggressive after flying 500 miles, while German defenders ran low on fuel after merely taking off. The combat that followed was savage. The Luftwaffe committed over 200 fighters to defend Berlin, but they faced not exhausted bomber gunners, but fresh, eager Mustang pilots with altitude advantage and superior aircraft. The 4th Fighter Group alone claimed 15 victories. More significantly, numerous German attacks on bombers were disrupted before they could press home effectively. For American pilots, the P-51B represented a revelation. Captain Don Gentile of the 4th Fighter Group, destined to become one of the war's top Mustang aces, described his first combat in the type. "The Mustang gave us everything we dreamed of: speed to catch any German fighter, maneuverability to dogfight with them, and range to escort bombers anywhere they went." The cockpit was cramped but efficiently designed. The pilot sat behind an inline engine that provided excellent forward visibility. Unlike the radial-engined P-47 that blocked much forward view, the P-51's design offered superior sightlines. The bubble canopy of later P-51Ds would improve visibility further, but even the B model's greenhouse canopy offered good all-around vision. Lieutenant Robert Powell of the 352nd Fighter Group recalled the physical demands. 6 hours in a Mustang meant 6 hours on oxygen above 10,000 feet. Your mouth cotton dry from the oxygen, your back aching from the parachute and dinghy pack you sat on, your neck sore from constantly swiveling to check for enemy fighters. But we had the capability to complete the mission, and that made all the difference. The appearance of Mustangs over Berlin triggered immediate crisis in Luftwaffe High Command. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring initially refused to believe reports. When confronted with proof, gun camera footage from German fighters clearly showing P-51s over the capital, he reportedly declared, "When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the jig was up." While this specific quote's authenticity remains debated, it captures the shock German leadership experienced. The tactical implications were devastating. Every assumption underpinning Reich defense rested on the sanctuary of German airspace beyond escort range. Training facilities, assembly areas, aircraft factories had been located in central Germany specifically because they were thought safe from fighter attack. Now, American fighters could strafe airfields near Prague, engage German fighters over Munich, escort bombers to any target in the Reich. Major Günther Röhl, one of Germany's top aces with 275 victories, recognized the strategic shift. The Mustang didn't just extend the bomber offensive, it transformed it completely. We could no longer choose when and where to fight. They brought battle to us on their terms whenever they wished. The Luftwaffe attempted various tactical responses. Sturmgruppen were formed, heavily armed and armored FW-190s designed to break through fighter screens and attack bombers at close range. But these ponderous assault fighters were easy prey for nimble Mustangs. The Germans tried massed attacks with entire Geschwader attacking simultaneously, but American fighters possessed the numbers and performance to counter even these. Every tactical adjustment met a strategic disadvantage. German forces were declining while American strength grew daily. February 20 to 25, 1944, known as Big Week, demonstrated the transformed dynamics. The 8th Air Force launched Operation Argument against German aircraft production, with P-51s providing escort throughout. In 6 days, Americans flew 3,300 bomber sorties and 3,673 fighter sorties, losing 226 bombers but claiming over 500 German fighters destroyed. More critically, the Luftwaffe lost irreplaceable pilots. The American strategy shifted from merely bombing targets to actively seeking out aerial combat. General James Doolittle, commanding 8th Air Force, issued new orders in January 1944. Fighters were to seek out and destroy the Luftwaffe wherever found, rather than staying close to bombers. Captain John Godfrey of the 4th Fighter Group described the new aggressive tactics. We'd escort bombers to target, but once they dropped, we'd go hunting, dive to the deck, shoot up airfields, catch German fighters landing or taking off. The mathematics of attrition now overwhelmingly favored the Allies. January 1944, the Luftwaffe lost 1,311 pilots. February, 2,121. March, 2,115. These losses included many irreplaceable veteran pilots with years of combat experience. American losses, while significant, could be replaced by massive training programs producing 11,000 new pilots monthly. The P-51 represented more than extended range. It showcased American industrial and technological superiority. The K-14 computing gun sight, introduced late 1944, gave Mustang pilots significant advantage in deflection shooting. This gyroscopic sight automatically calculated lead based on range and rate of turn, dramatically improving accuracy. The Mustang's 650 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, while less powerful than German cannon, offered advantages in ammunition capacity and rate of fire. A P-51 carried 1,880 rounds total, enough for nearly 30 seconds of continuous fire. German fighters armed with cannon typically carried ammunition for less than 10 seconds of fire. In prolonged dogfights, American pilots could afford to take shots. German pilots couldn't. Major Heinz Baer, one of Germany's top aces with 220 victories, noted the qualitative difference. The Mustang was not merely another fighter, it was a complete weapons system. Everything about it was optimized for its mission. We had excellent aircraft, but nothing that combined all elements so effectively. Behind statistics lay human tragedy on unprecedented scale. Young men on both sides, many barely out of their teens, fought desperate battles 6 miles above Earth in temperatures of -50 degrees Fahrenheit. The fortunate died instantly. Others endured horrific burns, traumatic amputations from cannon shells, or slow deaths in parachutes riddled with bullet holes. Lieutenant William Wisner of the 352nd Fighter Group shot down a Bf-109 on March 8, 1944, and watched its pilot bail out. His parachute opened, but he was on fire. I could see him trying to beat out flames on his flight suit as he descended. There was nothing anyone could do. German pilot Walter Schuck of JG-7 described the changing nature of combat. In 1943, we were knights of the air, engaging bombers in something approaching fair combat. By 1944, we were being pursued relentlessly. Mustangs would follow us to our airfields, circle overhead while we tried to land, then attack. There was no safety anywhere. The psychological toll proved devastating. Luftwaffe pilots who had been confident in 1943 became increasingly fatalistic by mid-1944. Letters home, censored by German authorities but preserved in archives, revealed deepening despair. One pilot wrote in April 1944, "We take off knowing most of us won't return. The Americans are everywhere, always above us, always with more fuel, more ammunition." As spring turned to summer 1944, The Mustang's range enabled a strategic campaign that would cripple the German war machine: systematic destruction of oil production. Synthetic oil plants at Luna, Politz, and Brooks, previously beyond Escort range, now faced regular precision attacks with full fighter protection. The impact was catastrophic for the Luftwaffe. Aviation fuel production fell from 175,000 tons in April 1944 to 30,000 tons in July and just 10,000 tons in September. Training flights were curtailed, then eliminated entirely. New pilots arrived at combat units with as few as 50 hours total flight time, compared to American pilots with 300 to 400 hours. Oberst Johannes Steinhoff, commanding JG-7, described the crisis. "We had the world's first operational jet fighter, the Me-262, capable of 540 miles per hour, but we could barely fuel them for combat missions. I watched helplessly as dozens of these superb aircraft sat idle while Mustangs roamed freely overhead." June 6, 1944, demonstrated complete reversal of air superiority. On D-Day, the Luftwaffe managed only 319 sorties over France, compared to 14,674 Allied sorties. Only 2 German fighters appeared over the invasion beaches. Mustangs and other Allied fighters had established such dominance that the invasion proceeded under an aerial umbrella virtually unchallenged by German aviation. Oberstleutnant Josef "Pips" Priller, commanding JG-26, flew one of those 2 sorties with his wingman, Unteroffizier Heinz Wlodarczyk. Making a single strafing run along Sword Beach, Priller later described the mission as suicide disguised as duty. They survived only because Allied fighters were too surprised to react to the lone pair of FW-190s. The Mustang's role extended beyond escort to active fighter bombing. P-51 pilots became adept at train busting, destroying locomotives with their 50-caliber guns. A single Mustang could carry 2 500-pound bombs or 10 5-inch rockets in addition to guns, making it formidable for ground attack. Captain Charles "Chuck" Yeager, who would later break the sound barrier, flew P-51s with the 357th Fighter Group. On October 12, 1944, he shot down 5 Bf-109s in a single mission. But he also described the moral complexity. "We went from protecting bombers to attacking anything that moved. We'd strafe trains knowing they might be carrying civilians. It was total war, and the Mustang gave us capability to take that war anywhere in Germany." Germany's technological response came in revolutionary jet fighters. The Messerschmitt Me-262 and rocket-powered Me-163 Comet. The Me-262, capable of 540 miles per hour, was nearly 100 miles per hour faster than the P-51D. In experienced hands, it could slash through bomber formations and escape before Mustangs could react. Yet even these technological marvels couldn't reverse the tide. Adolf Galland, flying an Me-262 with JV-44 in 1945, shot down 7 aircraft, but recognized the futility. "We were like a few tigers facing hundreds of wolves." For every Me-262, the Americans had 50 Mustangs, and Mustangs could loiter over our airfields, attacking jets when they were most vulnerable during takeoff and landing. The jet engines of 1944 to 1945 were temperamental, requiring careful throttle management and long runways. Mustang pilots learned to exploit these weaknesses. Lieutenant Urban Drew of the 361st Fighter Group shot down 2 Me-262s on October 7, 1944, by catching them in the landing pattern. The jets, low on fuel with throttles reduced for landing, were helpless against diving Mustangs. By early 1945, the arithmetic of air combat had become impossible for Germany. The United States produced 15,486 P-51s during the war, with approximately 8,000 serving in Europe. At peak strength in March 1945, 8th Air Force alone operated 14 fighter groups equipped primarily with Mustangs, over 1,000 aircraft. Against this, the Luftwaffe could muster perhaps 300 to 400 serviceable fighters on any given day, scattered across the entire Reich. Fuel shortages meant many never flew. Pilot shortages meant those that did were often manned by teenagers with minimal training. Kill ratios reflected this imbalance. By 1945, Mustang pilots were claiming 10 victories for every loss. Lieutenant Colonel John Meyer, commanding the 352nd Fighter Group, ended the war with 24 aerial victories, all in Mustangs. He observed, "By 1945, it wasn't combat, it was execution. We'd find German airfields, circle overhead, and shoot down anyone who tried to take off or land. The Mustang had made all of Germany a combat zone." After the war, captured Luftwaffe pilots provided revealing testimony about the Mustang's impact. General der Jagdflieger Adolf Galland wrote in his memoirs, "The P-51 was perhaps the most significant fighter aircraft of World War II. Until it appeared, we controlled the timing and tempo of air battles over Germany. After it arrived, we never regained the initiative." Major Heinz Noka, who survived the war with 33 victories, was more direct. "The Mustang killed the Luftwaffe, not the bomber offensive, not the invasion, but that fighter that could fly to Poland and back. We went from predators to prey in the span of 3 months." Perhaps most poignant was testimony from younger pilots who entered combat late in the war. They flew first missions with minimal training, facing experienced American pilots in superior aircraft. One captured pilot stated, "I flew my first combat mission in November 1944 with 55 hours total flight time. On my third mission, I saw Mustangs for the first time. They were everywhere. I knew then that we had lost not just the war, but the sky itself." The Mustang's contribution extended far beyond tactical victories. By enabling deep penetration raids with acceptable losses, it allowed systematic destruction of German industry. Oil production, the Wehrmacht's Achilles heel, was reduced to 10% of requirements by March 1945. The transportation network was shattered, preventing movement of troops, supplies, and raw materials. Aircraft production, though maintained at high levels through dispersal, became meaningless when there was no fuel to fly the planes or trained pilots to man them. General Karl Spaatz, commanding United States Strategic Air Forces in Europe, stated, "The P-51 was the decisive weapons system of the European air war. It made possible the daylight bombing campaign, the invasion of Europe, and the systematic destruction of German military power." Beyond strategic impacts lay profound human transformation. German pilots who entered combat in 1943 as confident warriors emerged from the war, if they survived, as changed men. Many spoke of specific moments when they realized the war was lost, almost always connected to their first encounter with Mustangs deep over Germany. The P-51 represented a watershed in fighter design, influencing aircraft development for decades. Its laminar flow wing demonstrated potential for dramatic drag reduction. The integration of British engine technology with American airframe design established a model for international cooperation that would continue through NATO and other alliances. The Mustang's range achievement changed fundamental assumptions about fighter aircraft. Pre-war doctrine held that fighters were short-range point defense weapons. The P-51 proved fighters could be strategic weapons, capable of projecting power hundreds of miles from base. This concept would influence everything from the F-86 Sabre in Korea to modern fighters capable of global deployment with aerial refueling. By the numbers. The final statistics are staggering. Total Mustangs produced, 15,486. Enemy aircraft destroyed in air combat, Europe, 4,950. Enemy aircraft destroyed on ground, 4,131. Locomotives destroyed, 9,254. Combat sorties flown, 213,873. Combat hours, 1,344,420. Operational losses, 2,520. The kill-to-loss ratio in air combat exceeded 11-to-1, unprecedented in aerial warfare. But the true impact transcends statistics. The Mustang broke the Luftwaffe's will to fight, enabled the invasion of Europe, and shortened the war by months, if not years. In 1985, 40 years after the war's end, American and German fighter pilots met at a reunion in San Antonio, Texas. The conversations revealed the Mustang's lasting impact on both sides. Colonel Clarence "Bud" Anderson, who flew 116 combat missions in Mustangs and scored 16.25 aerial victories, sat across from Oberst Günther Rall, Germany's third-highest scoring ace. Rall raised his glass to the P-51 Mustang, the fighter that won the air war. We had excellent aircraft, superb pilots, and were fighting over our homeland, but you had the Mustang, and that made all the difference. Walter Schuch, who transitioned from FW-190s to Me-262 jets, added, "We went from laughing at unescorted bombers to taking cover from Mustangs in just 4 months. No military force has ever experienced such a complete reversal." Former Luftwaffe General Johannes Steinhoff, his face still bearing scars from his Me-262 crash in April 1945, reflected, "We laughed at your bombers in 1943 because we couldn't imagine America could produce a fighter with range to escort them to Berlin. The P-51 taught us the danger of underestimating one's enemies. You ask when we knew the war was lost? That day in March 1944, when we looked up and saw Mustangs over Berlin. At that moment, every German pilot knew the truth. We had already lost." The shift from German pilots laughing at unescorted American bombers to cowering from Mustang fighters represents one of the most complete reversals in military history. In less than 6 months, from October 1943 to March 1944, the Luftwaffe went from dominant to defeated, from predator to prey, from confident to condemned. The P-51 Mustang catalyzed this transformation, but it represented something larger: American industrial might, democratic cooperation between allies, and the power of technological innovation driven by necessity rather than ideology. German pilots taught that American democracy made the nation weak, discovered instead a society capable of unprecedented unity and production. The laughter of German pilots in October 1943 was based on reasonable assessment of technical limitations. No single-engine fighter had ever demonstrated range necessary to escort bombers from England to Berlin and back. What they failed to anticipate was American problem-solving capability, the successful marriage of American and British technology, and the industrial capacity to produce thousands of superb fighters in months rather than years.